The moment my family shattered wasn't loud. It was the sharp clink of my mother's wine glass hitting the table, followed by a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Then came the one word that changed everything: burden. After giving them $250, 000 of my own dreams to save theirs. That was my reward. This is the story of how I walked away from the people who gave me life, so that I could finally start living my own. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Phoenix, and my life, for its first 30 years, was a masterclass in learning to shrink. It was a lesson taught in the most loving of settings, amidst the comforting, deceptive scent of garlic and oregano at Rossini's. Our family restaurant was a small, aging institution in Boston's North End, a place of worn red leather booths and walls covered in faded photographs. It was supposed to be our pride, our shared history. But for me, it had become a beautifully decorated cage of expectations, where I was perpetually invisible. A typical Sunday was the lesson in its most concentrated form. The day would begin with the unspoken obligation to be present for the long, languid family dinner that evening. I'd spend the morning in my small room upstairs, the sounds of the bustling restaurant below, a constant reminder of the world I was expected to serve. I would be deep in the abstract architecture of code, designing financial systems for global clients, only to be called downstairs to fix the clunky online reservation system that kept crashing because my father, Arthur, refused to invest in a proper one. I'd spend an hour untangling the mess, my reward a distracted pat on the shoulder before he hurried off to greet a regular. My skills were a utility, like a plumber or an electrician, called upon when something was broken. That evening, the restaurant was alive. The air was thick with the smells of simmering sauce and roasting meats, a sensory blanket designed to simulate warmth and togetherness. My older brother, Leo, held court at the head of our large family table, his voice booming with confidence. He was painting a grand vision of his latest real estate venture, a luxury condo project on the waterfront. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor, listened with rapt attention, their faces illuminated with pride. "That's my boy," my father would say, raising his glass of Chianti, "building something real, something that will last." I had just closed a significant deal for my firm that week, landing a contract that would net me a substantial bonus. I tried to share the news, explaining the complexity of the negotiation and the innovation of the platform we were licensing. My mother smiled politely, a vague, distant look in her eyes. "That's nice, dear," she said, before turning back to Leo. "Now, Leo, tell your father about the marble you're considering for the lobby. My success, abstract and measured in digits and data, simply could not compete. It dissolved into the ambient noise of the restaurant, another of Phoenix's quiet, incomprehensible hobbies, a few weeks before the end. A persistent knot of anxiety led me to the restaurant's cramped, dusty back office. I told my mother I wanted to help prepare the quarterly tax filings. Reluctantly, she agreed. For 2 days, I immersed myself in the ledgers, and what I found made my blood run cold. The business wasn't just struggling, it was actively sinking. I could see where Eleanor, with her precise accountant's handwriting, had tried to hide the hemorrhaging. She'd shifted expenses, post-dated invoices, and deferred payments, creating a fragile illusion of solvency. I found a shoebox full of unopened, red-stamped past due notices from suppliers. I confronted her that evening. After the last customer had left, we sat in the dark, empty restaurant, the silence amplifying the gravity of the situation. I laid out the bills on a table. "Mom, what is this? This is serious. We're months behind." For the first time in years, I saw her polished facade crack. Her shoulders slumped and she began to cry. Silent, weary tears. I didn't know what else to do. She whispered, "Your father. His pride is tied up in this place. If he knew how bad it was, it would destroy him. I just needed a little more time. Leo's project. He said it would be the answer to everything." She made me promise not to tell him. She swore she had a plan. I agreed. And in that moment, I became her co-conspirator in a lie, propping up my father's pride and my brother's fantasy. The secret sat between us, a toxic bond that made the eventual betrayal all the more poisonous. Leo's project was the family's salvation, the mythical lottery ticket that would solve everything. He was so consumed by his own vision that he was blind to its flaws. He insisted I attend a pitch meeting with potential investors, wanting me there to handle any technical questions. I sat in a sleek boardroom, listening to my brother spin a tale of guaranteed returns and unprecedented luxury. I could see the holes in his financial projections, the overly optimistic timelines, the lack of contingency planning. He was selling a dream, not a business. After the meeting, I tried to voice my concerns. We sat in a coffee shop, the scent of roasted beans a stark contrast to the sour taste of anxiety in my mouth. "Leo, your construction estimates are at least 20% too low," I began gently, "and you haven't accounted for a potential rise in interest rates. If there's even a small market downturn." He cut me off, his charming smile tightening into a mask of irritation. "Phoenix, you're a programmer, not a developer. You think in worst-case scenarios, I think in possibilities. You have to be an optimist to build things. Maybe that's your problem. You're too pessimistic." He dismissed my detailed, data-backed analysis as a character flaw. I was the Cassandra of the family, cursed to see the future, but never to be believed. That conversation was a turning point. I realized he didn't want my expertise, he wanted my silent, smiling approval. The foundation of their denial was built on a sacrifice I'd made 5 years earlier. I was 25, and a small startup I had co-founded with my brilliant friend, Mark, was on the verge of greatness. We had poured our lives into creating an intuitive micro-investing platform, and we just received a lucrative buyout offer from a major Silicon Valley firm. I remember the electricity in the air, the feeling of standing on the precipice of a future I had built with my own hands. The night before we were due to sign the final papers, my mother called. Her voice, usually so controlled, was a raw, ragged sob. She told me about an old, forgotten loan from a failed expansion years ago, a balloon payment that was now due. The bank was calling it in. They were going to lose Rossini's. The world tilted on its axis. I called Mark and told him what was happening, my voice hollow. His reaction was swift and logical. "Phoenix, no," he pleaded. "Don't do it. This is your future. We built this. Your family. They are a black hole for your money and your talent. They're drowning, and they'll pull you down with them." I knew he was right, but the image of my father, a broken man standing in front of a shuttered restaurant, was a weight I couldn't bear. The next day, I walked into that sterile glass conference room. I told a shocked and disappointed board that I was exercising my option to sell my shares immediately, foregoing the more lucrative partnership track. The signing of the papers was an out-of-body experience. The transfer of $250,000 was a quiet digital transaction that felt like a funeral. When I told my parents, their reaction was not gratitude for my sacrifice, but overwhelming, selfish relief. They never asked about the company, about Mark, about the future I had just incinerated for them. The crisis was averted. The utility had served its purpose. All of this unspoken history was a guest at the table that final night. The dinner was to celebrate Leo securing his funding, the massive loan that had leveraged every asset our family possessed. The restaurant was buzzing, filled with the energy of a false victory. Sal, the family friend, was there with his wife, both of them beaming. The wine flowed freely. Leo, more arrogant than ever, was holding court, accepting congratulations like a conquering hero. He had positioned himself in the center of the room, and the rest of us were merely satellites in his orbit. He talked about legacy, about the Rossini name being etched onto the Boston skyline. My father watched him, his chest puffed with a pride so immense it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The tension built slowly, a series of microaggressions that tightened the coil in my stomach. When Sal tried to ask me about my latest project, Leo cut in with a booming laugh. "Sal, don't get her started on the computer stuff. You'll be here all night." Later, when I mentioned a potential issue with the new liquor license laws, my father waved it away. "Leo has the best lawyers. It's handled." I was minimized, dismissed, and rendered irrelevant at every turn. The breaking point came when Leo, flush with wine and adulation, decided to be magnanimous. "And don't you worry, Phoenix," he said, raising his glass to me. "When my tower is built, I'll set aside a nice little office for you. You can play your little number games there." He was offering me scraps from the table he believed I had helped set. That was it. The spring of my compliance and silence, wound tight over 30 years, finally snapped. "Those number games paid off the debt that would have closed this entire empire years ago, Leo," I said, my voice dangerously calm. The silence that fell was immediate and absolute. "It was my mother who broke it." She picked up her wineglass and set it down on the solid oak table. The sharp, definitive clink was a judgment. Her eyes, when they met mine, were as cold as a winter sea. "That money was your duty, Phoenix," she said, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You helped, yes, but lately, you are just a burden. Always coming in here with your strange, abstract ideas instead of supporting your brother's tangible success. Burden." The word didn't just hurt, it redefined my entire existence. The sounds of the restaurant faded to a dull buzz. I looked at their faces, my father's stern disapproval, my mother's cold fury, Leo's shocked indignation, even Sal's uncomfortable retreat into his wineglass. In that moment, I knew I was utterly alone. I slowly folded my linen napkin, a small, final act of composure. I pushed my chair back from the table. As I walked towards the door, I took a mental photograph of it all, the cracked plaster near the entryway, the smell of my great-grandmother's sauce, the confused faces of the patrons. I walked out into the cold Boston night and just kept walking, the familiar streets of the North End suddenly feeling alien. Each landmark, the old church where I was christened, the bakery where my father used to buy me cannoli, was a ghost of a life that was no longer mine. I ended up in a sterile airport hotel, the profound silence of the room a roaring testament to my sudden isolation. For hours, I just sat on the edge of the bed, the chaos in my mind a swirling vortex of their voices. Then, with a strange, chilling calm, I began to act. I opened my laptop and methodically erased my old life. I tendered my resignation to my Boston firm via email. I found the job offer from the San Francisco company and formally accepted it. I scrolled through the photos on my phone, a digital history of forced smiles, and deleted the entire album. A text message lit up my phone. It was from Leo. "Mom's really upset. You completely overreacted." The gaslighting was so predictable. I typed and deleted a dozen furious replies. Finally, I just typed one word: goodbye. Then I blocked his number, then my mother's, then my father's. I wasn't running away. I was executing a planned, necessary demolition of my own life. The first few months in San Francisco were a lonely, arduous climb. My new apartment was a beautiful, empty box with a stunning view of the fog rolling over the bay. The loneliness was a physical presence. At my new job, I was assigned to a high-stakes project under a notoriously difficult manager, a man named David who was openly skeptical of the new hire from Boston. He challenged every decision I made, forcing me to defend my work in a way I never had before. It was grueling, but it was also a gift. For the first time, my ideas were being judged on their merit, not dismissed because of my identity. 4. My friendship with Chloe, a brilliant data scientist, became my lifeline. She was sharp, funny, and had a zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. We started as work colleagues, but our bond deepened over late-night coding sessions and Tuxao lunches. One day, she found me staring blankly at my screen, the weight of my isolation pressing down on me. You know, she said, leaning against my cubicle wall, you have this force field around you. It's impressive, but I get the feeling it's also exhausting. Her directness was startling. That weekend, we went for a hike in the Marin Headlands, surrounded by the raw beauty of the coastline. I finally told her a piece of my story. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. She didn't offer pity. She offered something better understanding. Your family sounds like a cult with a really good menu, she said. And I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like a release. Chloe was the one who encouraged me to take a solo trip to Yosemite. The idea was terrifying, but I went for 3 days. I hiked alone, surrounded by the silent, colossal granite giants. The physical challenge was immense, but the mental one was greater. In the silence of the wilderness, the voices of my family grew louder. Burden, pessimist, not a team player. I sat at Glacier Point, looking out at the vast, majestic valley, and I let myself feel the full weight of the grief. I grieved the family I wished I had, the love I had craved. And then I let it go. I left their voices there, in the valley, and walked back to my car feeling lighter, stronger. The news from Boston arrived in a slow, agonizing drip. My cousin called. Her voice strained. Then Sal, the family friend, called, trying to mediate. Phoenix, your mother is heartbroken. Your father is lost. Maybe you should just call. His words were well-intentioned, but they were salt in the wound. Sal, were you not at the table that night? I asked quietly. Did you not hear what she called me? He had no answer. The calls from my cousin grew more dire. Leo's project had collapsed in a spectacular fashion, taking the restaurant and the house with it. One evening, an email appeared in my inbox from my father. It wasn't an apology. It was a gruff, wounded message. Your mother isn't well. Your brother made a mistake. A family is supposed to stick together. I don't know what I did to raise a daughter who could be so cold. I read it, my heart aching for the father he could never be. And then I moved it to the trash. I met Ben, an architect, at a gallery opening. His love was quiet, steady, and built on a foundation of mutual respect. He loved to hear about my work, his eyes lighting up as I explained complex systems. He saw me. Our life together was beginning to feel solid, real. Then the summons came. It started with a long, self-pitying email from Leo, which I deleted. Then came the text from my cousin with the picture of the foreclosure sign. A cold dread filled me. I showed it to Ben. They're going to come, aren't they? I said, my voice barely a whisper. He simply took my hand. And you'll be ready, he said. They ambushed me in the gleaming lobby of my office building. They looked diminished under the bright California sun, their Boston pallor and heavy coats marking them as outsiders. The confrontation was like a one-act play of desperation. Eleanor went first, her appeal a torrent of tears and guilt-laden memories of my childhood. How can you abandon us after all we did for you? I let her finish. You did a lot for me, I said, my voice calm. But you never respected me. There's a difference. Arthur was next, his appeal a gruff lecture on duty and legacy. The Rossini name means something blood is thicker than water. I met his gaze. A legacy of debt. A name you mortgage for a fantasy blood is just biology. Dad, loyalty is earned. Finally, it was Leo. He was a broken man. He mumbled an apology for how things turned out. I looked at him, devoid of pity. Are you sorry you gambled away their home? Leo. Or are you just sorry you lost? He had no answer. They made their final, desperate plea for me to buy back the house. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. You're not asking me to buy a house. You're asking me to buy back a past that you all chose to burn to the ground. You're asking me to fund a life I have fought every single day for the last year to escape. The answer is no. It will always be no. I turned and walked away. The swish of the closing glass doors behind me, the final word. That evening, I told Chloe what had happened. She listened, then poured 2 large glasses of wine, To Phoenix, she said, raising her glass. The architect, later, with Ben. I finally let myself cry. Not for them, but for the little girl who had tried so hard for so long to be loved. He just held me, offering a quiet, unwavering sanctuary. My life with Ben was about building. We found a small plot of land in the hills overlooking the ocean. He would spread out blueprints on our coffee table, and we would spend hours talking about sightlines and materials, about creating a space that was ours. He respected my input, valued my perspective. We were partners. The contrast to my old life was so profound it was almost dizzying. One afternoon, a notification popped up on my phone. The house in Boston had been sold. I looked at the message, then out the window at the Pacific Ocean. I felt a faint pang, not of regret, but of a final, quiet grief for the family they could have been. Then it was gone, replaced by a profound and lasting peace. I had learned that forgiveness isn't about absolving those who hurt you. It's about forgiving yourself for not leaving sooner, for believing for so long that you were unworthy. It's about releasing the hope that the past could be any different. The story ends not in a monologue, but with an action. A few months later, Ben and I stood on our plot of land. The foundations had been poured. In my hand, I held a hammer. Together, we drove the first nail into the frame of our new home. The sound of the hammer hitting the nail was solid, real, and definitive. It was the sound of a new legacy, a new foundation, a future I was building with my own two hands, for myself. It was the sound of being home. Ultimately, a story like this reminds us that our true foundation isn't the one we are born into, but the one we have the courage to build for ourselves. We learn that family is not always defined by blood, but by respect, and that a true legacy is not what is handed down, but what is painstakingly created from our own integrity and resilience. Sometimes, the most profound act of love is not holding on tighter, but letting go, releasing the heavy hope that the past could ever be different. And instead, embracing the quiet power of writing our own future, one deliberate, self-honoring choice at a time. Thank you for sharing this powerful journey with us. Every story has a moment that resonates, a truth that hits home. What part of this journey spoke to you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective and personal insights are what build this incredible community. If you believe in the power of stories that inspire and empower, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter.